Okay, perfect. So let's get started. So first, I just want to thank everybody for joining and say Happy National Nutrition Month. March is National Nutrition Month. Um, this year, the theme is Personalize Your Plate. And so we talk about different ways to make your foods part of a healthy diet, foods that you like. Nobody has to eat foods they don't like. And as you can see, the other two graphics that I have, this plate, this is my plate. So this is the USDA's replacement for the food guide pyramid. This is what we use now for a healthy diet to show a balanced meal. And then below that, you might have seen this before. This is the American Institute of Cancer Research, the new American plate for healthy eating. And it's essentially very similar to my plate. It's a third of the plate or less is animal protein, and then 2/3 of your plate or more are plant-based foods. So your fruits and vegetables and grains, both are showing an emphasis on plant-based diets. Um, so that is around all the time, not just for National Nutrition Month. But what better way to celebrate National Nutrition Month than talking about labels and how to decode those labels and understand what they mean and how to use them for a healthy eating plan. So that's what we're going to do today. Uh, I like to tackle label reading with something like this. Each serving contains 10 grams of okay in moderation, 5 grams of not the worst thing you could eat, and 15 grams of it probably won't kill you. Because that's a lot of times looking at a label, that's as good as it gets, right? When we don't know what numbers we're looking at, what the numbers mean, or how to interpret them. The FDA, Food and Drug Administration, actually for 2020, did a big update to the nutrition label. So we're going to start with just looking at some of the differences. So the first label on the left is the old label. And then you can see the new label next to it, the 2020 updates. And so we're just going to take a second to look at what those changes are. And then we're going to kind of tackle each section of the label piece by piece. Donna, we can get you a copy of the meeting. You are welcome to email me afterwards and I can send it to you. But ultimately, we're just recording it so that you can view it later, okay? So new changes. First, the serving sizes. So the serving size is a little bit bigger. It's in bold font. And you might find if you're buying the same product now versus a couple of years ago, that the serving size has actually changed or been updated. And we're going to talk about that more in a second as to why those serving sizes have changed. Calories are also bigger and in a bold font, okay? So that they're easy to find and you can kind of quickly, your eye goes to those calories and you can see what you're looking at. You don't have to hunt for them. This column over here, the percent daily value, we're going to talk about that a little bit later also, but they have been updated. So daily values, like your daily goal for sodium or your daily goal for sugar or fat, those have been changed to reflect newer research and evidence. And so those changes have changed the percent daily value, how much you get from towards your total goal for the day. Also, added sugars are now on food labels instead of just total carbs or total sugars. And so the added sugars we'll talk about later, that's different than total sugar or natural sugar. So those have to be on the label now. And then these nutrients at the bottom are also a little bit different. It used to be that calcium, iron, vitamin A, and vitamin C were required on the food label to show how much of those nutrients, because we found that most Americans were often deficient in those nutrients. And now Vitamin A and vitamin C, very rarely are people deficient in those anymore, so they are not required to be on the label. Calcium and iron are still there. And now vitamin D and potassium are required because we are finding that people are often deficient in those. This particular label, this particular example does not have folate listed. And it may just be that this particular food didn't have any folate, but you may start to see down in this bottom section where these nutrients are, you may start to see folate on some of those nutrition labels also, because of the risk of deficiency and the importance of folate in the diet. So let's start at the top. Let's look at serving sizes, okay, and at calories. So it's important when you're looking at serving sizes to know how many servings are in a package. I always use canned soup as an example, because most people, when they open up a can of soup, they're going to eat the whole thing. They're going to eat that whole can as one serving. But if you look at a food label for canned soup, it's very often considered 2 servings. So you're looking at calories, you're looking at sodium, and you think those numbers are reflective of the whole can, but that's actually just for half the can, okay? So you always want to start at the top with the serving size and the number of servings in the container so that you know how much you're actually eating. Now, with the update, we mentioned that some of the serving sizes have been changed or updated, and that's to better reflect the amount that people typically eat. A lot of food manufacturers were putting small serving sizes on the labels to make their food label look better, and make those numbers smaller. But that's not how much people actually eat of those foods. And so that's where the serving sizes have been changed. That does not mean that the serving size on the label is a recommendation for how much to eat. It just is a reflection of how much of that food people typically eat. Ice cream is a good example. On old food labels, a serving of ice cream was a half cup, and now they've increased it to 2/3 of a cup because nobody eats a half cup of ice cream. Calories are per serving. Okay, so the number of calories listed on the label, that's per serving. So again, if we take that can of soup reference, if it's 400 calories per serving, that's for half the can. So if you eat the whole can, now it's 800 calories. Okay, so just important to keep that in mind. Also, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, low fat doesn't mean low calorie. Okay, it can still have a lot of other stuff in there to make it a high calorie food. So try not to let those claims and the advertising trick you. All right, there we go, technology. Moving on to the next section, we want to limit the next group here, and that's going to be fat, cholesterol, sodium. Okay. In order to reduce your risk for heart disease and high blood pressure, specifically, we want to limit saturated fat. So another change on the food label is that they removed the total calories from fat, because most of our research, most of the evidence is showing that the type of fat matters more than the amount of fat. So we really want to cut back on saturated fat and try to avoid trans fat and really focus on unsaturated fatty acids. Okay. We also want to limit sodium, and we talked about those daily values being updated. So sodium is a good example. The recommendation for sodium used to be no more than 2,400 milligrams a day, and now they've changed that to 2,300 milligrams a day. So that will change the percent daily value. Okay. So now, do we do more or less of this group? How do we know? A lot of people follow a low carbohydrate diet, or a high protein diet, or higher carbs, lower fat. So if we look a little bit closer at this section of the food label, specifically, we want higher fiber. So in that total carbohydrates, you get fiber, total sugars, and added sugars. Those all make up your total carbohydrate number, okay? So we want more fiber, less sugar, to lower your risk of heart disease. We're going to talk about the whole grains in a second, but let's talk about those added sugars. So we said that's new with the new label, that they're including that line for added sugars, not just total sugars, because there are a lot of foods that have natural sugar in them, like fruit, like milk. And so the total sugar will give you the combination, but when the line that says includes X amount of added sugar, that's not the natural sugar that's present in the food. That's the amount of sugar that the manufacturers added to sweeten the food. Okay. And so we really want to decrease those added sugars. We want to limit calories from added sugars to less than 10% of your total calories for the day. Okay. Whole grains, that's where your fiber is going to come from in a lot of foods besides your fruits and vegetables. And whole grains, we'll see that a little bit later on the ingredient list. So on the fact panel, you're not going to see whole grains specifically, but that comes lower in the food label on the ingredient list. We also want a good amount of lean or low fat protein. And that's going to be things like egg whites, chicken or turkey without the skin and trimmed of the fat. Seafood is a great source of lean protein. Your fatty fish like salmon and mackerel, those are going to be unsaturated fats, those heart healthy omega-3s. So not necessarily lean, but still very good for you and a great source of protein. Okay. So now let's look at those nutrients. When you're looking at the food label, you want to choose foods that are rich in vitamins and minerals. So you can compare different labels looking at calories and nutrients, because ultimately an item with fewer calories and more nutrients is probably going to be a healthier food choice than an item with high calories and really low nutrients. Those are just empty calories, okay? It is tricky. You have to look at the serving size again if you're comparing labels, okay? Because if you're looking at calories versus nutrients, if those two foods have totally different serving sizes, do you get all those nutrients in a half cup, or do you have to eat 2 cups to get all those nutrients? So make sure that you're comparing, similar serving sizes, similar items when you're looking at those. And again, we said vitamin A and vitamin C, not on the label anymore, or not required to be on the label anymore. And now you are always going to get D, calcium, iron, and potassium listed on the label, and sometimes folate or folic acid. Okay. Keeping an eye on the time. So kind of as an overview, when you're looking at a food label, start at the top, check your serving size and how many servings are in a container. And then you check your calories, okay? We're going to get to this footnote in a minute, but if you are looking at calories and you don't know, is that a good amount? Is that a high amount? This footnote tells you that most of these values are based on a 2,000 calorie diet. Now, a lot of us don't need 2,000 calories a day. I only need somewhere around 15 or 1,600 calories a day. But if you're not sure, use that as the guide. If you think about 2,000 calories a day, is 230 a lot? Not a lot. What's the serving size? How much do I get to eat for that 230 calories? This particular label is only 2/3 of a cup. It's not a lot for that many calories. So that's, that's how you kind of read those numbers. So then once you've looked at the serving size and the calories, now you're moving on to your fat, cholesterol, sodium. We want to try to keep these limited. And then you're looking at those nutrients at the bottom. We want to try to get enough of those nutrients, okay? So then let's revisit this percent daily value. Sometimes those percentages are more helpful than these gram or milligram amounts. So if you're looking at the percentages, 5% or less is considered low, 20% or more is considered high, okay? So if we look at saturated fat, because remember we want to limit saturated fat, so this 1 gram of saturated fat is considered 5% of your daily value. So that's not too bad. That puts us right on the edge of that low category, okay? But let's jump down to those added sugars. And again, that's not total sugars, that's added sugars. So the added sugars are 20% of your daily value. That's high, that's considered high. My guess is between the serving size, the calories, the fact that it's got a decent amount of calcium in it, but a lot of added sugar, I'm guessing this is an ice cream label. I don't know that for a fact, but I'm kind of leaning towards this being ice cream. So yes, we're getting calcium. There's even some iron, so maybe it's not ice cream. But we're getting a lot of sugar. Okay, that doesn't mean you're never allowed to have your favorite foods that have some sugar in them. But when you're comparing food labels, when you're planning your meals for the day, if you are going to treat yourself to something that has a higher percentage, then maybe you look for other labels, other meals through the day that have lower added sugar amounts to kind of make up for the treat. Okay. It's all about balance. Now let's look at that footnote. We said the daily value, this is just an explanation of that percent daily value. It tells you how much a nutrient in a serving contributes to the daily diet. So those percentages we said are based on a 2,000 calorie diet, 2,000 calories a day, because that's kind of on average what a lot of American adults need, okay? You may not need 2,000 calories a day. Maybe you need more than 2,000 calories a day, but this gives you a rough estimate. It's a guide for how to use those nutrition labels, okay? And then we said we had to get to the ingredient list. So we looked at that facts panel, but the ingredients underneath it are what's in the food, what's in the product. That has not changed. Ingredients are still listed in order by weight. So the first ingredients are the major ones. They're the most contributing to that food. And then as you get towards the end of the list, those are the least amounts that are in the product, okay? So this particular label, wheat flour and unsweetened chocolate, are the two first ingredients. Those are the two main components of that product. And that's where the whole grains come in. When you're looking at grain products like bulgur wheat or wild rice or bread, whole wheat bread, you want that first ingredient to be whole wheat, whole grain, something like that on the ingredient. You don't want it to be enriched white flour, okay? That's not as nutritious. All right, let's talk about some of the food claims that we see. Now, these you're not going to see on the panel, the nutrition label, but typically you're going to see these claims on the front of the package to catch your eye, to grab your attention, okay? I like to use sodium as an example. Reduced is tricky. So if a food product says that it's reduced in calories, sugar, sodium, fat, it doesn't mean that it's healthy. Reduced does not mean good for you, okay? Reduced only means that it's 25% less than what it was originally. 25% less of a really high calorie or really high fat or high sugar food may still be high calorie or high fat or high sugar. Okay, so you have to be really careful when the product just says reduced. You still got to check that label and see if it's actually a healthier product or not. Okay. Light or low, light is a little bit similar to reduced. Light means a third fewer when we're talking about calories. If we're talking about sodium or fat, light would be 50% less. So that's a little better than reduced, but it still doesn't mean a whole lot. Okay. Free and low, that's what you're looking for. Low sodium means that it is guaranteed less than 140 milligrams per serving. Okay. We go back to that can of soup. Half a can is a serving. If you eat the whole can, now you're talking about 280 milligrams, okay? Which for a meal is still not bad. So low is going to give you, if we look at fat, low fat, less than 3 grams. Low calorie, less than 40 calories, okay? If it's free, in 0, but it's pretty close to 0. So if it's calorie free, less than 5 calories. Sugar free, less than 0.5 grams. This is all per serving, okay? Sodium free, less than 5 milligrams. So these are just, keep this in mind when you are looking at those label claims and thinking that you're picking up a good product. If it's reduced, it may be a good product, but it may not be. So you really need to check the actual panel, the facts panel, to look at the amount that's in there. Okay. And there you go. We finally simplified the nutrition information. I have used this before. If you have hung with me for all of my lunch and learns, you have probably seen this before, and how could I not use it again?